Welcome to this class on the author as producer, a chapter from Marxism and Literary Criticism by Terry Eagleton. Terry Eagleton is a literary scholar, cultural theorist, and a prolific author in England. Born in 1943, Eagleton attended Cambridge University in the 1960s for his bachelor's and master's degrees, and on earning his Cambridge doctorate, he became a student of the literary critic Raymond Williams. Though he has Irish Catholic roots, he argued the merits of a populist Marxism as an alternative to postmodern theory and institutional Christianity. As a public intellectual, Eagleton gained prominence for his stringent criticism of the new atheism as naive and of the highly intellectualized postmodernist theory as bankrupt. He began by specializing in Victorian literature, such as the works of Charles Dickens, but ranged widely into both Shakespeare and modern literature. He was especially interested in the rise of the new literary theory among the French intellectuals who advocated a postmodernist viewpoint. He gained prominence in the debate over literary theory by presenting a new Marxist approach in his 1976 book Criticism and Ideology, a study in Marxist literary theory. In his 2011 book, Why Marx Was Right, he similarly argues that the basic analysis of Marx was right, but has been corrupted, simplified, and co-opted just as institutional Christianity corrupted the populist ethics of its founder. Eagleton is known for an enjoyable literary style that has often made his surveys of dense theoretical issues highly readable. He has written more than 50 books. Eagleton's first book, The New Left Church, is a synthesis of Catholic theology and Marxist criticism, while Shakespeare and Society is in some senses a less radical text. Eagleton returned to the subject of Catholicism in The Body as Language, again attempting a Marxist and Christian synthesis, leaving the subject for good with another book, Exiles and Emigrants, Studies in Modern Literature, arguing that the 19th century realist novelist could grasp society as a totality and draw creative energies and modes of expression from the saint. Eagleton compares their fiction with that of the foreigners such as Conrad, James, Joyce, Eliot, Pound, Yeats, and so on. This enables him to have the dialectical insight that the controlled evaluation of the exiles and emigrants was brought about by an awareness that the declining culture they confronted was in no full sense their own. Thus, the felt presence of the alternative tradition is the enabling factor in the production of literary expression. Eagleton utilizes this insight to produce readings of what he terms upper and lower middle class novels, Conrad's Under Western Eyes, and the works of Green, Eliot, Auden, and Lawrence. The more familiar Eagleton emerges with his next three books, Myths of Power, a Marxist study of the Brontes, Criticism and Ideology, and Marxism and Literary Criticism. In his introduction to the second edition of Myths of Power, Eagleton notes how the book was published on the very threshold of a major resurgence of Marxist criticism in Britain. This is a key statement in situating the intellectual and political context of Eagleton's work and his place in the institutional study of literature. Since the radical political events of the late 1960s, Marxist criticism had been much in the air, but when Myths of Power first appeared, the chief theoretical formulations of this critical current were still to emerge. Marxist literary criticism is becoming increasingly important and interest in the subject is rapidly growing. In this book, Eagleton analyzes the major issues that the subject presents, discussing the writings of Marx and Engels themselves and the work of writers like Lenin, Lukács, Benjamin, Brecht and so on. They are seen from four viewpoints central to Marxist thought: the relation of literature to history, the problem of form and content in literature, the question of literature and political commitment, and the importance of production and technology in art. Eagleton's exploration of these critical stances throws useful light on the connection between the Marxist approach and structuralism. The author stresses, however, that Marxist criticism cannot be seen simply in academic terms. In his preface, he rejects the illusion of neutrality in such a field and writes, Marxist criticism is part of a larger body of theoretical analysis which aims to understand ideologies, the ideas, values, and feelings by which men experience their societies at various times. And certain of these ideas, values, and feelings are available to us only in literature. To understand ideologies is to understand both the past and the present more deeply, and such understanding contributes to our liberation. Eagleton shows the part that Marxist criticism has to play in defining the crucial link between literature and historical conditions, and in so doing has produced a book that is both constructive and committed. The author as producer is the fourth chapter in this book. It is subdivided into the following: art as production, Walter Benjamin, Bertolt Brecht and epic theatre, form and production, realism or modernism, consciousness and production. Eagleton have spoken so far of literature in terms of form, politics, ideology, and consciousness in this book. But all this overlook a simple fact which is obvious to everyone, and not least to a Marxist critic. Literature may be an artifact, a product of social consciousness, a world vision, but it is also an industry. Books are not just structures of meaning, they are also commodities produced by publishers and sold on the market at a profit. Drama is not just a collection of literary texts, it's a capitalist business which employs certain men, authors, directors, actors, and so on, to produce a commodity to be consumed by an audience at a profit. Critics are not just analysts of texts, they are also academics hired by the state to prepare students ideologically for their functions within capitalist society. Writers are not just transposers of trans-individual mental structures, they are also workers hired by publishing houses to produce commodities which will sell. A writer, Marx comments in Theories of Surplus Value, is a worker not insofar as he produces ideas, but insofar as he enriches the publisher, insofar as he is working for a wage. Unquote. The Marxist critics he discusses in this chapter are those who have grasped the fact that art is a form of social production. Walter Benjamin and Bertolt Brecht. Art is, first of all, a social practice rather than an object to be academically dissected. We may see literature as a text, but we may also see it as a social activity, a form of social and economic production which exists alongside and interrelates with other such forms. In his pioneering essay, The Author as Producer, the title of this chapter, Benjamin notes that The question which Marxist criticism has traditionally addressed to a literary work is, what is its position with regard to the productive relations of its time? Art, like any other form of production, depends upon certain techniques of production, certain modes of painting, publishing, theoretical presentation, and so on. These techniques are part of the productive forces of art, the stage of development of artistic production, and they involve a set of social relations between the artistic producer and his audience. The originality of Benjamin's essay lies in his application of this theory to art itself. For Benjamin, the revolutionary artist should develop and revolutionize those forces of artistic production. It is not just a question of pushing a revolutionary message through existing media. It is a question of revolutionizing the media themselves. The newspaper, for example, Benjamin sees as melting down conventional separations between literary genres, between writer and poet, scholar and popularizer, even between author and reader. Benjamin takes up this theme again in his essay, The Work of Art in the Age of Mechanical Reproduction, where he subverts the ritual of traditional high art. Whereas traditional painting allows you restful contemplation, film is continually modifying your perceptions, constantly producing a shock effect. Shock, indeed, is a central category in Benjamin's aesthetics. The artistic equivalent of this is the technique of montage, the connecting of dissimilars to shock an audience into insight becomes for Benjamin a major principle of artistic production in a technological age. Brecht's experimental theatre, epic theatre, was for Benjamin a model of how to change not merely the political content of art but its very productive apparatus. Dismantling the traditional naturalistic theatre with its illusion of reality, Brecht produced a new kind of drama based on a critique of the ideological assumptions of bourgeois theatre. Bourgeois theatre, Brecht argues, is based on illusionism. It takes for granted the assumption that the dramatic performance should directly reproduce the world. Its aim is to draw an audience by the power of this illusion of reality into an empathy with the performance, to take it as real and feel involved by it. The audience in bourgeois theatre is a passive consumer of a finished, unchangeable art object offered to them as real. The play does not stimulate them to think constructively of how it is presenting its character and events, of how they might have been different. The task of theatre is not to reflect a fixed reality, but to demonstrate how character and action are historically produced, and so how they could have been and still can be different. The play itself therefore becomes a model of that process of production. It is less a reflection of than a reflection on social reality. Instead of appearing as a seamless whole which suggests that its entire action is inexorably determined from the outset, the play presents itself as discontinuous, open-ended, internally contradictory, encouraging in the audience a complex seeing which is alert to several conflicting possibilities at any particular point. The actors, instead of identifying with their roles, are instructed to distance themselves from them, to make it clear that they are actors in a theatre rather than individuals in real life. They show the characters they act rather than become them. The Brechtian actor quotes his part, communicates a critical reflection on it in the act of performance. The play is formally uneven, interrupted, discontinuous, juxtaposing its scenes in ways which disrupt conventional expectations and force the audience into critical speculation on the dialectical relations between the episodes. The results of these alienation effects is precisely to alienate the audience from the performance, to prevent it from emotionally identifying with the play in a way which paralyzes its powers of critical judgment. The alienation effect shows up familiar experience in an unfamiliar light, forcing the audience to question attitudes and behavior which it has taken as natural. It is the reverse of the bourgeois theatre, which naturalizes the most unfamiliar events, processing them for the audience's undisturbed conception. The audience must think about the action, refuse to accept it uncritically, but this is not to disregard or discard emotional response. One thinks feelings and one feels thoughtfully. He considers briefly three interrelated aspects of it. The first is the new meaning it gives to the idea of form. The second concerns its redefinition of the author. And the third, its redefinition of the artistic product itself. Artistic form is given a significantly new dimension by the work of Brecht and Benjamin. The relations of artistic production are in this sense internal to art itself, shaping its forms from within. Moreover, it changes its artistic technology, the relations between artist and audience. They can equally transform the relations between artist and the product. We think instinctively of the work as a product of the isolated individual author, and indeed this is how most works have been produced, but new media or transformed traditional ones open up fresh possibilities of collaborations between artists. The second redefinition concerns just this concept of the author. For Brecht and Benjamin, the author is primarily a producer, analogous to any other maker of a social product. They oppose, that is to say, the romantic notion of the author as creator, as the godlike figure who mysteriously conjures his handiwork out of nothing. Pierre Macquarie is equally hostile to the idea of the author as creator. For him too, the author is essentially a producer who works up certain given materials into a new product. The author does not make the materials with which he works. Forms, values, myths, impulse, ideologies come to him already worked upon, as the worker in a car assembly plant fashions his product from already processed materials. This applies, among other things, to the practice we know as art. The artist used certain means of production, the specialized techniques of his art, to transform the materials of language and experience into a determinate product. Louis Althusser says about practice. By practice, he means any process of transformation of a determinate given raw material into a determinate product, a transformation effected by a determinate human labor using determinate means of production. The third redefinition in the question, the nature of the artwork itself, brings us back to the problem of form. Brecht and Lukács in 1930s over the question of realism and expressionism says so. Lukács, as we have seen, regards the literary work as a spontaneous whole which reconciles the capitalist contradictions between essence and appearance, concrete and abstract, individual and social whole. In overcoming these alienations, art recreates wholeness and harmony. Brecht, however, believes this to be a reactionary nostalgia. Art for him should expose rather than remove these contradictions, thus stimulating men to abolish them in real life. The work should not be symmetrically complete in itself, but like any social product, should be completed only in the act of being used. Lukács represented political orthodoxy and Brecht was suspect as a revolutionary leftist. Lukács' realism is formalist because it is academic and unhistorical, drawn from the literary realm alone, rather than responsive to the changing conditions in which literature is produced. He is a utopian idealist who wants to return to the good old days, whereas Brecht, like Benjamin, believed that one must start from the bad new days and make something of them. Avant-garde forms like Expressionism thus hold much of value for Brecht, demand a different form of art to realize it. This is not easy to say that Brecht is abandoning the concept of realism. It is rather that he wishes to extend its scope. Realism for Brecht is less a specific literary style or genre, a mere question of form, than a kind of art which discovers social laws and developments and unmasks prevailing ideologies by adopting the standpoint of the class which offers the broadest solution to social problems. For Marx, the ability of art to manifest human powers is dependent on the objective movement of history itself. Art is a product of the division of labor, which at a certain stage of society results in the separation of material from intellectual work, and so brings into existence a group of artists and intellectuals relatively divorced from the material means of production. In capitalist society, it is converted into a commodity and warped by ideology. Yet it can still partially reach beyond these limits. It can still yield us a kind of truth, not to be sure a scientific or theoretical truth, but the truth of how men experience their conditions of life and of how they protest against them. There is, however, an obvious danger inherent in a concern with art's technological basis. This is the trap of technologism, the belief that technical forces in themselves, rather than the place they occupy within the whole mode of production, are the determining factor in history. Brecht and Benjamin sometimes fall into this trap. Their work leaves open the question of how an analysis of art as a mode of production is to be systematically combined with an analysis of it as a mode of experience. The question of how to describe this relationship within art between base and superstructure, between art as production and art as ideological, seems as one of the most important questions which Marxist literary criticism confront. There is the set of social relations between artist and audience, producer, consumer, vendor, purchaser, with which that technique is bound up. There is the relation between these artistic property relations and in general, there are two important reasons why Marxist literary criticism is important. First, because unless we can relate past literature, however, indirectly to the struggle of men and women against exploitation, we shall not fully understand our own present and so will be less able to change it effectively. Secondly, because we shall be less able to read text or to produce those art forms which might make for a better art and a better society. Marxist criticism is not just an alternative technique for interpreting Paradise Lost or Middlemarch or any other writings. It can relate past literature and help us to foreground the struggle of men and women against exploitation, and that provides a key to change it effectively. Thank you.